So what is the US government going to try to do? Well, this was debated at a hearing of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in Washington on the 30th of January in a hearing titled "The Malign Influence of the People's Republic of China at Home and Abroad." And in this hearing, the US Senate discussed plans to steal Chinese engineers. That's the term they use, steal Chinese engineers. So steal talent from China. And they also discussed plans to block and cut off other Chinese apps and competitors like they tried to do to TikTok. As expert testimony in this hearing, the Senate invited several former U.S. government officials who are now working in different U.S. government think tanks in Washington. There's a revolving door between them. One of these so-called experts was Melanie Hart, who's an extreme China hawk. She previously worked for the U.S. State Department and oversaw the State Department semiconductor strategy, trying to block China from getting access to chips to prevent it from competing with U.S. big tech monopolies. She's now the director of the China Hub at the Atlantic Council, which is a very hawkish think tank in Washington, funded by the U.S. government.
Let's steal their best engineers. China's national engineers developed the DeepSeek AI model that surprised the world this week. We'd be better off if the engineers behind that were working here in the U.S. and U.S. universities and U.S. companies.
Another expert who was invited to this Senate hearing is Peter Mattis. He's a CIA veteran and an extreme China hawk. He's the president of the Jamestown Foundation, which is closely linked to the CIA. It was originally founded during the first Cold War, backed by the CIA to provide jobs to right-wing dissidents from the Soviet Union who would go to the United States, and then the CIA would use this foundation to give them jobs. And this guy, Peter Mattis, who leads this very hawkish neoconservative foundation, he previously worked for the U.S. House of Representatives Select Committee on China. And in this Senate hearing, a senator asked him what he thinks that the U.S. government should do with these Chinese apps like DeepSeek and RedNote. And his response was that the U.S. government should ban them and should prevent people from being able to download them in the App Store.
What should we do about RedNote and DeepSeek and other platforms like that?
I think for those kinds of platforms, you have to adopt the same approach that was applied to TikTok, that it either is sort of removed from the control or it is no longer available in the app stores.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So this is the U.S. government's response to Chinese competition. They don't want Chinese competition. They don't want competition from anyone. They only want their big tech corporations in Silicon Valley to be global monopolies. But the narrative now being used to try to justify banning Chinese competitors is that OpenAI claims that DeepSeek was using OpenAI's models in order to develop DeepSeek's models. Now, this is hilarious on so many levels because OpenAI is notorious for basically using the entire internet, ignoring all intellectual property, and using everything, sucking it up for data to train its large language models. This has been known for years. It has been reported on in the press. OpenAI has used all of our personal information, scrubbing social media platforms, scrubbing everything on the internet. So, this is just so hypocritical. But it's also hilarious because now on Twitter, there are tons of developers who work in AI who are saying that they have evidence that OpenAI has used their models, has used their source code, has used their programming, their work in order to develop its own models. So OpenAI is accusing DeepSeek of what it has done for years. And the cherry on top of this hypocrisy, which is so funny, is that after DeepSeek went mega viral and became the most popular app in the US, ChatGPT changed its website and added chain of thought. If you use it, you can go to the bottom and there's a little light bulb and it says think, and this is chain of thought, which is based exactly on what DeepSeek did. This is why developers on Twitter are joking that they have evidence that OpenAI is training on DeepSeek's user interface. OpenAI, they just took the idea from DeepSeek, and now they're accusing DeepSeek of using their work. And there's another big irony in all of this, which is that when Peter Thiel, the tech billionaire, was invited to give a talk in 2014 at Stanford University, and his lecture was titled "Competition is for Losers," he argued in defense of monopolies. Can you guess who invited him? It was another Silicon Valley billionaire, Sam Altman, who is the CEO of OpenAI.
Today's speaker is Peter Thiel. Peter was the founder of PayPal and Palantir and Founders Fund and has invested in most of the tech companies in Silicon Valley. And he's going to talk about strategy and competition. Thank you for coming, Peter.
Awesome. Thanks. Sam, thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me.
So all of these Silicon Valley CEOs want monopolies. It's not just Peter Thiel. He's the one who said it openly, but Sam Altman of OpenAI is the one who invited him to argue in defense of monopolies against competition. And now OpenAI is complaining about Chinese competition and asking the US government to help it to restrict Chinese competition because they want a monopoly. And it's not just them. Another American tech CEO, Dario Amodei, published an article in the Wall Street Journal in January asking Donald Trump to put further restrictions on Chinese competitors so the US can maintain an AI monopoly. And he published this article in the Wall Street Journal along with co-author Matt Pottinger, who's a neoconservative China hawk, who was previously the Deputy National Security Advisor to Donald Trump in his first administration. Now, who is Dario Amodei? He is the CEO of the US AI company Anthropic, and some of the main investors in Anthropic are Amazon and Google. They have a direct partnership. So this guy, Dario Amodei, is a key part of Silicon Valley, of the AI big tech community. And in his article in the Wall Street Journal, Amodei asked Donald Trump to put more restrictions on Chinese competitors because he insisted that, quote, the US must lead the world in artificial intelligence to preserve national security, end quote. Essentially, his argument was that the US empire has to dominate the entire world. We can't allow China to have this technology because then they could challenge US hegemony, US dominance. He said that if the US dominates AI with the help of Trump restricting Chinese tech, it would provide a historic advantage for the US. He said AI will become the most powerful and strategic technology in history. He continued noting how AI technology will help to, quote, extend American military preeminence, end quote. So arguing that the Pentagon could use artificial intelligence to threaten other countries like China to maintain its global empire. And he said, quote, if they fail, another nation, most likely China, could surpass us economically and militarily, end quote. So the entire framing is about maintaining US hegemony and weakening China. And what is his solution to try to do this? He calls for export controls, which ban shipments to China of high-end chips needed to train advanced AI models. He said these are a valuable tool in slowing down China's AI development. And he noted that this is bipartisan. These restrictions started under Trump and were expanded under Biden. And now he's saying that the Trump administration, the second Trump term, should go nuclear and just put full-on restrictions, as many restrictions as possible, on China to block off all competition to U.S. Silicon Valley monopolies. Now, that article in the Wall Street Journal was published in early January. A few weeks later, Dario Amodei, this Silicon Valley CEO backed by Amazon and Google, on his website, he published another article arguing again for stronger U.S. export controls on China. And he specifically addressed the competition posed by DeepSeek. In this article, he was even more blatant about his goal. He said clearly that the goal is to maintain a unipolar world in which the US dominates the entire world through the use of AI technology. And he said, the question is whether China will be able to get millions of chips, which it will need in order to develop its own AI tech. And he said, if China can, we will live in a bipolar world where both the US and China have powerful AI models. But he doesn't want a bipolar world, yet alone a multipolar world. He wants a unipolar world, a global dictatorship controlled by the US with no competition. And he said, if the US puts more and more restrictions on China, and if the US prevents China from getting chips, he wrote, quote, we'll at least temporarily live in a unipolar world where only the US and its allies have these models, end quote. And then he said that, quote, in this world, the US and its allies might take a commanding and long-lasting lead on the global stage. Well-enforced export controls are the only thing that can prevent China from getting millions of chips and are therefore the most important determinant of whether we end up in a unipolar or bipolar world, end quote. So this is Silicon Valley's real goal, and we very rarely hear it stated so honestly, so openly. These powerful tech CEOs backed by Amazon and Google, they're saying they want the United States to be the unipolar power that controls the entire world. And what's so funny about this, and so ironic, is that these tech CEOs don't realize the implications of what they're saying, because they live in a little bubble surrounded by US imperialists funded by the US government with big contracts, and they're surrounded by other big tech billionaires who have the same worldview. And at the end of his article, he warned of a, quote, authoritarian government that has committed human rights violations, has behaved aggressively on the world stage, and will be far more unfettered in these actions if they're able to match the US in AI, end quote. That quote is so funny because until the end, it sounds like he's describing the United States. The US is a police state where every year on average, police kill more than 1,000 people. The US has less than 5% of the global population, but roughly 25% of all prisoners on Earth. And we know that the US National Security Agency, the NSA, spies on everyone all around the world, including heads of state. This was exposed by the NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden over a decade ago. And what's funniest of all is this tech CEO, Dario Amodei, accuses China of behaving aggressively on the world stage. There is no country on earth that comes even remotely close to the United States when it comes to aggression on the world stage. According to the US government's own data, the US has militarily intervened in the majority of all countries on earth. From 1798 until 2022, the US carried out 469 military interventions around the world, and from 1991 until 2022, the US carried out 251 military interventions, according to official data from the US Congressional Research Service. Meanwhile, do you know what year it was the last time China was involved in a war? 1979. China has not been involved in a war for more than 45 years, and yet Silicon Valley tech CEOs are claiming China is aggressive on the world stage while arguing in support of US unipolar dominance of the planet. But in order to understand how these Silicon Valley oligarchs think, I want to go back to this article that I keep quoting from Peter Thiel, published in the Wall Street Journal in 2014, titled "Competition is for Losers," in which he calls for Silicon Valley oligarchs like him to build monopolies. I think this article very succinctly summarizes the worldview of Silicon Valley, of these big tech oligarchs who basically control the US government. Donald Trump has exposed this. He invited the world's richest billionaire oligarchs to sit with his cabinet members at his inauguration in Washington on the 20th of January. Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, who's now the world's richest man, he is one of the most powerful people in the US government. Donald Trump gave Elon Musk an office at the White House, and he was joined at the inauguration by the CEO of Meta, Mark Zuckerberg, and he was joined by the founder of Amazon, Jeff Bezos. Also at the inauguration was the CEO of Google and Alphabet, Sundar Pichai, and the billionaire CEO of Apple, Tim Cook. All of these big tech oligarchs became billionaires by establishing monopolies. And in this article in the Wall Street Journal, Peter Thiel said it openly. He admitted that, quote, capitalism and competition are opposites, end quote. So he's saying that he's a capitalist. He supports capitalism, but he's against competition. He's saying that capitalism is based on monopolies.